Welcome to the Half Glass Podcast, where theology plus technology equals uncertainty, and we can never be quite sure if that glass is half empty or half full.
So we were doing our little, getting our pre-juices flowing here, rapping about stuff, and I thought it'd be helpful, again, we're throwing this out to people in our own communities and other places, to give us a little bit of setup of what we're doing. Obviously, we're starting a podcast here, we're just talking, we're just having a good time, just going with the flow. But I think a little like background of who we are might be helpful. My name's Dave. I'm a pastor here in San Antonio, Texas, and you can intro yourself. But I guess just to think about like why did we want to have podcasts? What's the point of all this?
Well,
Who are you?
I'm Ed, and I'm a pastor in San Antonio. We ran into each other while I was still working full time, and so I was, for a long period of my career, I was not interacting a lot with other pastors. I had to, because I was a worker priest, as it were, I had to.
What does that mean to be a worker priest?
It just means I paid the bills with a full-time job, and then did the pastoring in my spare time, as it were, and the or moonlighting, if you will.
Yeah.
And while I was doing that, some things had to go, and one of the things, unfortunately, was a collegiality. And so, of course, when we met first. But then there was more than that. I think when we started gabbing, we both realized that I would call myself a little bit of a contrarian. It's just like, it was very sobering for me to realize probably about 10 years ago that if I had lived in like the 1890s, I probably would have been a higher critic. Because it's like, the stolid old establishment that just doesn't get it. Yeah. Those guys really rubbed me the wrong way, and so if I had been there, but growing up, where it seemed like that establishment had been so beat up, at least the conservative ones, that they were just like crouched in a corner, hoping to survive, and then the scientific establishment were the ones I got contrarian about. So wait a minute, you guys are so sure, the world is millions of years old, and this and that and that. And it's like, how do you know that? You weren't there. Yeah. And so because of that, that's just wired into the way I am. Plus, I'm just neurotically big picture guy.
But it's part of the call, though, too, right? And I think, so that's a perfect segue, because, why are we doing a podcast, right? Not just because we like to talk and we're preachers and, we're 10 years late to the game of podcasting, right? But I feel like a part of this is to you always kind of say, I think you're jesting, but I think you're real honest, too, is like the pastor or preacher as content creator, like our duty, our job, our calling is to preach the gospel, to minister the sacraments, be the stewards of God's mysteries, right? And so we do that on Sunday morning, we do it Monday through Friday, and in a way, I think this medium can function similarly, right?
Right. And it's not just content creation, right? But just like guys that used to always say the pastor is the shepherd of souls. They didn't think that was all that the pastor did.
Self-sorted.
But they said that's kind of a primary way maybe pastors ought to see themselves. And I do think that pastors ought to primarily see themselves as content creators, because if no new content is needed, I learned this from radio advertising when we did some of that when I was in Seguin. The guy said, remember, you're not advertising to a crowd, you're advertising to a parade. Mm-hmm. And we're not preaching to a crowd of people, we're preaching to a parade, right? They're constantly moving. And because of that, the content needs to be redone. And so, and that's what I mean when I say content creator. In a lot of ways, it's the same old story. I'm terrified of innovation. When I start thinking I'm saying something that no one's ever said before, I get super nervous. I said, God, your name be holy, right?
I don't want to name for that. It's called heresy.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So but the way it's presented, that needs to constantly be updated.
I think you're right. And again, right. So we're gonna get to the title of the podcast, and I guess I'm the resident cynic, although we'll get more on that later. But I think I hear content creator, and I immediately no, this is some kind of way of getting on Instagram or so. No. I think you're right. That's the duty. What we're called to do is to be proclaimers and heralds of the gospel, right? And how will the message get out if they can't hear? And how are they going to hear if we're not running our mouths on the gospel?
Sure. Yeah. Well, when a lot of people, when they see content creators or influencers, they're thinking this, right? Or someone that's just looking at their phone all the time.
Yeah.
That they never have any interaction with anyone where they're not thinking, oh, I can make a podcast. I can make a short out of that. Right. And it's like, and that is, I mean, oh yeah, that's horrible. Right.
Yeah. And we don't mean that at all. But I do think you're intentionally saying it like that for a reason, for us to think about how we as leaders of the church, right? And again, why we're doing this, this is the fundamental reason why I'm doing this, is to talk about things for people in our church and the community and the world to hear vis-a-vis the gospel, right? So, yeah, I think begrudgingly, I guess we are content creators in the best sense of the word.
Right.
Okay, cool. So we connected years ago. Now we're finally putting the gift of gab to work here. The title of the podcast. Can you tell the people why the title of the podcast, this specific backdrop of that?
Well, this was Rev 2, and I don't know, maybe there'll be another one later. But Rev 2, Rev 1, it just popped it into me the other, a couple of, like a month or so ago when we were preparing to do this. Mm-hmm. And I said Pollyanna and their curmudgeon. And Pollyanna being like, I guess I looked it up. I knew the word meant like some really goofy, naive optimist.
Nice.
Yeah. And it was actually from some novel written by a woman where that was the eponymous title character, right?
Oh, cool.
And she was always, no matter what happened, just, oh, it's going to be great, it's going to be okay. Exactly. And so that character Pollyanna, I mean, that was I guess in its day was a popular novel, and so everyone started saying, oh, you're a Pollyanna. Okay, right? And that's where that came from. And then
Pollyanna and the
curmudgeon being like not a misanthrope, not like a guy that like hates people, but just like a hey kids get off my lawn type guy, know. And children should be seen and not heard, and get out of here, right? That's kind of what a curmudgeon is, right? And I thought those two were sort of funny things to come together, and at the time, I thought it was ironic because we had said, now you being the younger guy, you think, oh, you would be the Pollyanna, and the old white-haired guy would be the curmudgeon, but it's just the opposite. I mean, I'm like eternally optimistic about stuff, and you're just not sure. And so then I thought, well, when people argue about whether they're optimistic or pessimistic, what is it? Is it half glass empty or is it half full? There is a podcast called Half Glass Half Full.
Okay.
So that's like, I'm sure, an optimist podcast, but I want to leave it ambiguous.
Yes.
Is the glass, so it's just half glass.
And I kind of like that, man, because I think at times, although you and I agree on lots of stuff, there are times when we won't fit into those categories, those molds, where you may be a bit more cynical on something, I may be more Pollyannish, whatever the topic may be. But I think I like that. Yeah, I think that was cool. So, okay, so we're talking set up to the podcast, the half glass title, good. And again, I think today maybe I won't be so cynical. I'll be very happy and optimistic today, which is good. So that's a good setup again, so people just know who we are, where we're coming from. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about this today, if we may. We're members of what's called the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, right? And we're both clergy and pastors. I guess as we reflect on our church lately and the good, the bad, and the ugly, you gave a paper. I'm just going to transition right into this, man. You can fix it in post if you need to. But you kind of gave a talk recently to some pastors and clergy, and I thought it was phenomenal. You were referencing like big issues happening in our church. And I think, but here's the thing, not just in our church. I think they're happening across like intra-denominational. I think there is, and maybe this will be too grandiose, but I don't think so. There's a cultural moment right now happening where the church has been in decline for decades, right? But now there's this interesting, fascinating thing happening, at least by some of the data sets, that there seems to be this kind of little bit of percolating interest in religion, right? It's funny that I just saw the other day Ross Douthat, the New York Times, right?
Right. I don't even know. I never knew how to pronounce his name.
Douthat, yeah. I listen to audiobooks, so I know how to say it because they say it that way, right? So, but anyway, Ross Douthat, devout Roman Catholic, probably one of the more famous commentators from the New York Times, right? He writes a piece every week. Him and David Brooks, another big guy. But anyway, he wrote a book recently about basically the comeback of religion. Against all of the things that we hear against, the church in decline, and clearly, anecdotally, we're seeing some of that. But he's making the case, religion's coming back. And moreover, he says, even from a non-religious perspective, religion has a net value. Now, of course, we're preachers, so we're going to agree that that's a start, but not enough, right? But I guess my question is, if you don't mind, could you share with the kind people listening, and me again, What was your central thesis of that paper, of that talk? And how might, as we explore this together, how might this speak into people that are Christians and other denominations and see if this is happening in their tribes as well?
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. It wasn't, but I'm not taking you off the hook on this because I'm going to push back.
Okay.
Because I think for just so that you understand, and what I ought to do, I'll figure out some way in the podcast to include a link in the description in the comments to a place where if you're interested in reading this, if you're listening or watching, and so I'd like to read. That way you can just look at the whole thing and see what I wrote, because I'll stand by it. It was a publicly preached sermon. It wasn't a paper.
Yes.
It was actually a sermon preached to those pastors.
Yeah.
And I did say at the very beginning, I wasn't preaching in my normal way because I get up and sort of ramble sometimes, and to the congregation because I'm watching them to see if they're like getting what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And in this case, I felt like, well, I'm either going to connect or I'm not. And
you took great liberties, yes.
Yeah, and I just read the manuscript. Yeah. And so I think you're not wrong in describing it as a paper because I very rarely preach like that.
Yeah.
It's some guys do, and I mean I don't have any problems with it, doing it more often than I do. But occasionally it fits. And so when I was putting that together as a sermon, there had to be a text, and the text was the really well-known parable of Jesus, where he gets confronted with the people who's I guess probably the political rebels who got caught by Pilate, and he mixed their blood with the sacrifices, right? So then just mixed them together, just to humiliate them.
Yeah, really.
And I mean,
text,
right. Well, it's sort of like the equivalent in the day of like if you catch a Muslim terrorist and you stick a football and rub some bacon on him and then shoot him, right? To just say, you know what? You're going to hell, pal. You're not, where I'm going to make you unclean before I kill you. And that's what Pilate was doing to these people. And so they confront Jesus with this, and his response is, "You think you're better than those people?
Mm.
No, I tell you, if you don't repent, you too will perish." And then he tells this parable, right, about how the tree that's not producing fruit, and the owner of the vineyard says, "Cut it down," and the manager says, "No, let's give it another year. Let me fertilize around it. I'll dig around its roots to kind of like encourage it and give it one more year to produce fruit. If not, cut it down." And to me, that's just when I was preparing the sermon on that initially years ago, it just hit me like a ton of bricks that we misinterpret the good times in our lives so easily. I mean, we say, "Oh, God must be really happy with me. Look, I got the promotion and everyone's getting along with me. And all those problems I used to have, they're not there anymore." And maybe God's saying, "This is your last chance to produce some fruit." And that's the way I usually preach that text. Yeah. And that was a backdrop I used.
Repent and believe.
Yeah, and that was a text I used to the LCMS.
Okay.
The backdrop of that was, and I mentioned it in the sermon, later on, just sort of as a throwaway line. But my own emotional backdrop for that was, I remember hearing when I was a young man, Billy Graham saying that the LCMS was the sleeping giant, and I think a lot of people. I mean, Billy Graham was so big when I was a younger man, and everyone thought, "Oh, he's the greatest," and I remember LCMS Lutherans just love repeating that for a while, right? "Oh yeah, we're the sleeping giant," but the thing is, we never woke up, and now we're like all in our 70s and 80s, and the giant's muscles have atrophied from sleeping so long, and so why didn't he ever wake up?
Yeah.
And my take, for better or for worse, is that the reason the LCMS didn't wake up is because we got stuck in the devil's debate between maintaining our identity as Lutherans, which is a hard thing to do, and growing the church, which is also a hard thing to do. Yeah. And we got it in our heads that you had to choose between one or the other. It's like, you know what, I want us to be more united around word and sacrament.
Sure.
And we don't get some more people in here and we're not relevant, it doesn't matter. And you know what, I think both sides are right.
Yeah, to a degree, sure. Yeah.
But they can't get along with each other. And in the meantime, the sleeping giant just rolls and turns in his sleep with another fitful dream about, what should I do? Focus on this or focus on that?
B5 folk fun. I smell the blood of the German pastor. They'll say that. No. Okay. So but here's the thing, right? So let me stop you because so basically what you're saying is, and again, this is inside baseball, like Missouri Synod, weird Lutheran stuff, but I think there's greater application. I really, really do. So you're basically saying, to clarify, is that, and by the way, I think you're totally spot on. I think anybody awake has to realize there is this split in our church, and I think also other churches, right? We'll explore that in a moment. The identity guys and the growth guys. And so can you extrapolate that? Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means? What does it mean to be an identity guy in a church body? What does it mean to be a growth guy in a church body? Right?
Sure. And
tribal identity.
Tribal identity. And now when you say the word tribal, you're starting to speak my language, because,
Ding, ding,
you know,
ding.
I mean, as I've watched things and, you know, through the years trying to figure out what's going on and just observed human nature, I mean, we struggle with tribalism. I mean, we all do it around 18, 19, 20. I mean, it's just part of adolescence.
Yeah.
Who are the people that are like me, and who are the people that aren't like me?
Affinity groups.
Right, exactly.
Affinity groups.
And so this idea of tribal identity, and it came free to the Lutherans early on, because as soon as Luther started saying you're saved by grace alone through faith alone, he immediately got pushback, and so that like made the natural. I mean, and that's basically the formula of Concord, right? You know, yeah, we've argued a little among ourselves, but this is our tribe, and we believe this. And what sort of come to happen in the larger society is that first of all, people lost interest in the finer nuances of theological debate.
Okay.
There's no doubt that happened. And I remember Mackenzie when I was taking historical theology at the seminary. I remember asking him a question, because he was talking about some developments in the early 1800s where they were just developing these doctrines to a higher and higher extent. And I asked him, well, whatever happened to those arguments? Was there ever a resolution? And Mackenzie was so funny. He said, no, Ed, they moved on to other questions like, is there a God?
Paul Tillich. Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think that, you know, people did move away from that, and in the light of that, in the LCMS, I mean, because when we talk to a Catholic, I mean, we say, well, we're Christians because we believe we're saved by grace through faith, and any informed Catholic is going to say, well, that's what we believe too, bro.
Yeah.
And so what makes you different from us? And the old Pieper's answer was that no, our entire identity is built around that. And that his entire 3-volume Christian Dogmatics. I mean, the thesis of that 3-volume work is that everything can be reduced to whether you're saved by grace through faith. You know, the idea of salvation that way. That's the doctrine on which the church stands or falls, and everyone gets it wrong except us.
Which, by the way, is behind you on that.
Yeah, I mean, but that's our identity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you know what? That is my identity. I don't think Pieper was wrong necessarily.
Yeah.
But what it reminds me of is Paul Samuelson versus Adam Smith, because Adam Smith came across with the invisible hand and all this sort of stuff, and he said, look, free markets work perfectly. And Samuelson, with some very sophisticated math, what put him on the map with his PhD thesis was, he said, well, what happens if you relax some of those assumptions? What if the market isn't easy entry and exit? What if you know there's all these things that are like slowing people down, where they aren't willing to switch brands, or whatever? And, you know, does the market still work? How messed up can it be and still work? And it's the same way with our theology. I mean, how imperfect can your understanding be, and still work on it and still have it work? I mean, the old LCMS. I mean, their idea was that to just keep adding more and more onto the catechism and say, we're going to give you, 237 proof texts, and you got to memorize all these. And now you're really going to be equipped to face the world. Yeah. And the response was this giant shrug. It's like, well, who cares?
Yeah. And just to be clear, right? Like, we're not, I think that the great kind of strength of this dichotomy of reflecting on our church body with the growth guys and the identity guys is not to throw stones. And is not to say, I mean, because you're right. We're Lutherans, man. I'm a Lutheran. This is a part of who we are fundamentally. But I think the issue is what happens is we reduce ourselves to just these camps. And what happens is the superordinate goal of being together, like we're working on the one thing of being people that are Christians for the God, is that fades away, right? And that's the danger, right? And it goes to this tribalism thing that you mentioned really well, right? By the way, you ever read the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger.
No, should I?
Oh, dude, it's so good. It's so good. Just real quick, like,
Well, sell me on the
fix it
book.
in post.
Sell me on the book.
Okay, so Sebastian Junger, he got famous for, this is like an ADHD sidebar here, but he got famous for being a journalist during one of the wars, the Afghanistan war. He was like a photojournalist. They made a documentary about his book called Restrepo. Have you heard of that? Anyway, he wrote that book. Anyway, and then he comes back and writes this book called Tribe. So he's embedded in Afghanistan with these military dudes for months and months and months, connects with them. And this is the premise, thesis of why he wrote the book called Tribe. They come back, they're like out of war zone and, sitting somewhere stateside having a beer at a bar. And he's reflecting on this interesting moment he shared with them being in war and almost dying. And he realizes to a person, all these guys, after a few weeks away from the war, from the battle, from that intensity, they yearn for it. They want to go back. Right. And there's a big commentary here. The book basically says that we need this kind of deep connection with each other. And the problem is, like, these young men were thrown into this extreme environment, and then now they're put out of it, and they can't be normal again, man, because of this primordial thing. And he actually opens the book with this really interesting thing, and you'll dig this, that at the turn of the dawn of America, right, the United States of America, the British people are coming, and they're noticing that occasionally some of the native folks would basically either take captive, or some of the whites would leave the community there in the Commonwealth up there in the Northeast, and they would go live with the natives. And some of them actually stayed, right? Whether it's, whatever the situation was, they would just stay and not come back. And they noticed, and I think Ben Franklin writes about this, and I'm probably butchering it, you can Google it, but he says there's been many occasions where the white man has gone to flee and live with the natives and the savages off the fat of the land in this kind of beautiful tribal primitive way. And he said, but there's not a single example of one of the native guys leaving their tribe to go live with the white man in civilization. And so it's this interesting thing. And then he just builds his book on, like, what is tribe? And so again, I just want to say, a long way of saying, tribe is good. Tribe is necessary. But tribe can also lead to picking up bows and arrows and killing lots of people if we're not careful. So that's just a long way of saying the tribalism is the one side. And now what's the growth side? What is that? Speak to that.
Sure. Well, and let me because I do think that the problems of the two are inseparably linked,
Mm-hmm.
because the identity guy wants to go to the church,
Mm-hmm.
and the growth guy wants to stay Lutheran.
Yes, amen.
I think
for the most part.
Yeah. Well, the problem is we disagree on. In the end, sometimes things get a little polemical, and people
Mm-hmm.
cast aspersions on people's intentions, right?
Yeah, sure.
You see that, and maybe there's some people that really haven't thought it through, and there might be a few, very few, I would say. I don't know how they'd survive in the LCMS that really just are bad actors, and they are either just trying to fundamentally undermine the doctrine because the devil told them that try and get these guys to sell out on
Or they're like a secret spy,
right,
the church or something.
Something like that. Maybe there might be a few characters like that, or that have made so many friends that is maybe like the guy that went to live with the different tribe and he can't come back, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's possible, but I feel like that's the way the debates usually run. I think you're one of those, and rather than stopping to say, what are the pressures on someone that wants to maintain a Lutheran identity? And they're difficult pressures.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I think it's a real statement that Roman Catholic would say, well, we believe you're saved by grace through faith. And what do we have to say? Well, you're actually semi-Pelagian, and it's like, well,
Sure.
just well, we reject Pelagius. Yeah, well, you're semi-Pelagian.
That's right.
And the same is true with a lot of other Protestants, right? In a way, the Lutheran Church has been a victim of its own success, because our primary thing that we're saying, look at the scriptures, look at this, you're saved by grace through faith. There are a lot of other groups that believe that besides us.
Sure. Yeah, they claim that.
And Pieper said, oh, none of them get it right except us. And I don't disagree with Pieper on a certain level. Otherwise, if I felt like some other group got it better, I would leave.
Go there. Yeah.
But the real question is, there are probably people in my congregation that are probably more Reformed than they are Lutheran.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that is worth mentioning is there's probably people in Reformed churches that are probably more Lutheran than Reformed. I mean, we've kind of lost the narrative on that, and I think that's where the identity guys, get very anxious. They think, and I think a lot of times they think liturgy is going to be our salvation. If we can just make every hymn perfectly aligned with the text and with the gradual and the verse and all this sort of stuff, and just make it all fit together. And I mean, that's the way a pastor's mind thinks. And I've done that for years, and I love services like that. And I hate to tell them, I just don't think. I feel like you're just going to keep moving the goalposts for yourself, and you're never going to get there.
Yeah.
And on the church growth guys, they're thinking, oh, if we could just let go of this one thing, a lot of people think chanting is weird, so let's just stop doing it. I mean, that church that's growing like by leaps and bounds, that non-denominational church, they don't chant. Let's get rid of it.
Sure. Yeah.
And then let's be more like them, and then we'll grow.
Yeah.
And it's like, I hate to tell them, but that doesn't work either.
No, it doesn't.
And so here we are, as you said, in this really strange season, where all of a sudden you got evangelicals that are, I mean, it's not that their numbers have fallen precipitously, but you're starting to see some fraying at the edges, and you're starting to see some guys that say, I don't like that gig. I want something that feels more like in tune with the way people are really wired.
Or like you said last week, or when we last one about the first podcast, like it's more real. There's something that feels like a production or a show, or in the words of one dude I heard years ago in an interview, he said, when I go to like an evangelical church, like one of these big productions, it feels like they're trying to sell me a car.
Yeah. And I mean, it can be like that. And again, I have friends who are evangelicals and evangelical pastors, and they're very earnest, serious people.
Oh, yeah, we're not.
We're not. I don't want to throw rocks at anyone.
No.
But I mean, but in the end, what works, right? And we're here. I mean, the word I'd like to use is we're a voice. I mean, the Lutherans are a voice in the world, and maybe not everyone's going to hear us, but I think we're a legitimate voice.
Some people wouldn't.
Yes.
Dear listener. And by the way, it's not like this is new. This idea, I talk about this all the time with people, like the Lutheran Church, liturgical, sacramental, all this stuff, kind of slowing things down. In the past 10, 15 years, there's a cottage industry of liturgical churches that are capturing some of these what we call burnt out evangelicals, right? From the hustle of that lifestyle,
Yeah.
There's a whole denomination, actually. I mean, honestly, the Anglican Church in North America, the ACNA, that is kind of doing this really, really well. I don't know if you're familiar with these guys.
I've got family members that used to go to evangelical churches that are going to those churches, one of those churches now.
But you're right. There's the interesting moment where this is now like the Book of Common Prayer is now being produced by like Zondervan and by some of these evangelicals, because it's making a comeback, right? Saying your prayers and slowing down is now what people want, which by the way connects to what we're talking about, technology, and everything feels fake. And so what's real? What's real? Like reading an old hymn book and reading a prayer from like the 17th century. That feels real to people. And we've talked about this too, at different times, of like a part of the cultural moment, I think, is also like the slow, maybe trickle data points of churches like ours getting a few more people in. But specifically, and let's talk about this a little bit maybe, is I'm noticing in my own parish here is that I'm getting interest in people that are coming and sticking around, of younger people and young men, right? And it's like, again, I go back to this. It's like, what are they looking for? We're all searching for something, right? Bruce Springsteen, we all got a hungry heart, and a lot of these young guys come from other traditions. So there's, something is happening, right? And I think it behooves us as pastors and leaders and clergy to be aware of it, and to try to, we're not going to try to do some growth thing or replicate it, make a widget out of it, but to just be thinking about it and remarking on it, I think is something helpful. I think right now other churches are experiencing the same thing, as they're realizing, like, because when everything's chaotic, man, like in the 1950s, like we're all just kind of cultural Christians, whether you're Methodist, Presbyterian, or Catholic, whatever, we're all in it together. But now the world is more atomized, the world is more different, the world is more, like it's different. And so what do? You cling to some kind of tribal connection, right? It's human. It's, like I said, primordial. And again, on the one hand, it can be helpful, but it can be dangerous if you reduce yourself to this tribalism that leads to like just weird behavior that's unhealthy.
Well, I want I mean, I feel like you glossed over something there and you just let me push back on you a little bit with what you said, because I think the 50s, our understanding of it, it's a little more complicated than what you are saying. If you look at this in a broad brush, like I say, is my sort of penchant to do. In the 50s, you had you mentioned Tillich before, right?
Yeah.
This and Bart and all these guys are basically saying we have to demythologize the church, and it was very much, I think the people that were in charge of society were tolerating Christianity because they figured eventually our grist mill is going to grind everything up to a powder, and we're going to be able to make, a capitalist state that that where everyone's happy and human problems are solved by science instead of all these old superstitions, right? And I mean that was, and there was this sort of unspoken tradition among the leaders, most of the intellectual leaders of society, that was the case. Then and that only increased as time went on, but that project wound up running aground.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, postmodernism, which I'd like you to talk about. So explain to me how that works, because I know what it did to the scientific establishment. I can see that. But how it managed to do it, I'm sort of interested in.
Well, I mean, I'm no expert, obviously, but I would say postmodernism, and again, a lot of dudes have said this in the past decade and a half or so, is that to your point, postmodernism was a great threat, I think. So it started in really kind of literature and philosophy. You have guys like Jacques Derrida, and this guy's a guy actually in Southern California at the University of Irvine, and he's basically writing that saying things like grammar is oppressive and basically deconstruction and basically there's no truth. I mean, kind of the caricatures of what you think about postmodernism. It's rooted in like a something. Like there is something to that. It's not as crass as what you hear the critics say. But anyway, the thing about postmodernism is so fascinating. And by the way, a guy that's so interesting to read is a guy named Michel Foucault, and he's what's called a post-structuralist, and he's kind of postmodern, kind of just this weird French guy. But I always loved this intro. I had to read some book in his in undergraduate. I forget what it was about, but he was all about power, and he wrote a whole book about the prison state. And so again, they're talking about Hegel, and because for Hegel, God is the state. Like all this kind of weird deep cut philosophy. But he has this great analogy, and I'll use this as a segue to say how postmodernism could be both a blessing and a curse. And that's what I meant a moment ago. Because in the past 10 or 15 years, a lot of theologians have said postmodernism that crushed the establishment of power and authority for science or for maybe the state that led to chaos and anarchy is also did it to the church, but there's a back door for the church, because now this fascinating thing is happening is where modernism was a great threat to the church because we're fighting with science and trying to always keep up the hustle of who's got the truth, whereas now almost in a way the beauty of the church, the beauty of Christ, is a way people, I think, are more open to the church because postmodernism has grabbed the zeitgeist. Anyway, but this is what Foucault says, and I'll just throw it out to you. He says famously, as a famous analogy, he says, and this is he's talking about hospitals, and he's talking about cathedrals in the Middle Ages, and about doctors and priests. And he says this controversial thing, which is kind of interesting. He says in the current age, this is like in the 70s in Paris, the churches are clearly dead. The cathedrals are empty, clearly, right? Nobody believes in God anymore, he would say. He said, so, but what we needed to replace that. So he says, now, this thing that has happened is now the center of the town is no longer the cathedral. The center of the town is the hospital. Or the bank, I would say, too. But let's just stick with the hospital. And he says, and so the great high priests now are no longer the clergy, but the physicians. And he doesn't extrapolate this out too far, but you can see what's happening now. I always say to people, when you get cancer, do you get on your knees and pray first, or do you call MD Anderson in Houston? And I think he's so right about this, is that, and this is there's so many ways to go with this, but Foucault basically says is the power of the church was usurped by the power of science and medicine. And he's kind of an anarchist, so he doesn't really care who has it. He just says everything's reducible to power. So, I mean, I'm kind of rambling here about different strains, but fundamentally, I think postmodernism can be seen as a friend to the church if we understand it as a way to decouple the constraints of modernism from the church. In other words, so you and I every week will stand at an altar that we call holy, and we will do a miracle called the Mass, or called the Eucharist, Holy Communion, where we believe bread and wine is no longer just bread and wine, but truly the body and blood of our Lord. and then we will have this strange cannibalistic like ritual where we think God is coming down to us and giving us medicine for our souls, the early church called it. That didn't play well in the 60s, 70s, and 80s for lots of people. I think this is going to play better now in the next 2 or 3 decades for people that are open to mystery and awe and weird stuff. So, in other words, keep the church weird.
Yeah. I love it.
That was ramblings, but you
No. That's perfect. I mean, and it states. I don't know that I could have put it as well, but it states what I think I feel, and the reason I say that is because, to tie back to our earlier conversation about like tribalism within the LCMS or these camps.
Yes.
I think sometimes my brothers who are very worried about identity, and rightfully so, but I think they make the mistake of thinking that they're wringing their hands and just saying things are always getting worse for us, as they have been for over a century.
Yeah.
But actually things have gotten better, and you just haven't woken up to it. And I think sometimes when they run into postmodernism, and this is to me to just shake my head. I mean, the way Luther complained about the Germans and his own church. I mean, this would be my complaint about the LCMS. We never have seen any new development that we didn't just hate to begin with. Just say, oh no, now we got to deal with this too. And it's like, well, wait a second. There's actually a lot of silver linings in that cloud. I mean, I'm not postmodernist or a post-structuralist at all.
Me neither.
But I'm willing to say I don't want to be too crass about it and say the enemy of my enemy is my friend, because I don't see it in terms of enemies and friends.
Yeah.
But I mean, they tore down something that was looking to try to destroy Christianity. And it's been fascinating for me to watch, because I mean, I knew lots of atheists growing up. I still know a lot of people who are atheists, but the ones I remember growing up were really kind of congenial about Christianity. Said, oh, you want to believe that? That's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, but it got way more militant after 2001, and that's because and I think 9/11 was a shot across the bow to let the atheists know, wait a minute, you're not as close to the finish line as you think you are. I think a lot of them thought just another generation or two, and no one's going to be believing this stuff anymore at all.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, it's still the nuns or the spiritual but not religious, categories that get tracked by sociologists. I think there's a lot of people with their fingers crossed saying, oh, will they just take over everything? And there'll be none of those other crazy Lutherans and Catholics and Jews and everyone else left. Can we just move to a rational way of looking at all this? And I think that the answer is no, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And that's why atheists has gotten militant, because they don't feel like they're winning anymore. I mean, people get militant when they're on the ropes, and that's
when you're like in the corner, man. You gotta fight.
You gotta start swinging, right? And I mean, and so they can't afford to be as magnanimous as they used to be. And so, to me, I think this is like great news.
I agree.
And I will share this formulation with you that I think I've shared with you before, but I want to share with anyone that's watching. Is that it hit me in a Bible study. All my best ideas come preparing for sermons or Bible studies, but it hit me while getting ready for a Bible study that is truth relative or absolute. I mean, this would be the debate between a materialist scientist, modern, and a postmodern. I mean, a modern would say some truth is relative, of course, because we see different cultures and stuff, but that's all the stuff that doesn't matter. But the real truth, like underneath the things that are the boiling point of water and stuff like that, that's truth, right? With a capital T, and that's never going to change. And I mean, that's still a very common, kind of position people would stake out. And the postmodernist or the post-structuralist comes along and says, no, even that's not true. All truth is relative, even your boiling point of water. And they start just like saying, that's ridiculous. How can you believe that? But these guys dig in their heels and they make an argument that's kind of hard sometimes for them to deal with, above a real minimalist way. And I mean, I'm just sitting there saying, yeah, right, because I've got an answer. Truth isn't relative, and it isn't absolute. Truth is a person.
Amen, Jesus Christ. Yeah.
And I mean,
that just it just undoes everything. That's so disarming. But what are you saying, crazy man?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, truth is a person, right? And I mean, and I feel like we should be preaching that all the time.
And that's
Truth, and just say, you know what? Stop using science and the doctor to answer all your questions. You know, stop saying it's been settled when there's a study, a peer-reviewed study, it says it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Stop thinking that way and start asking, what does the one guy that claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life, because I, by the way, claim to be his follower, what does he say about that?
Who we know what he says in his word, of course. Yeah.
And I mean, and I think it's something that will allow us to have debates about things in a way that, you know, well, what do we do with, I mean, just to pick current events, I mean, like immigrants and stuff like that. What do we do, you know, with those situations? Well, I mean, I personally think that the current Pope made a really terrible move with his latest letter.
That was interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like he staked out a bridge too far. And the guy, I mean, honestly, the guy comes across to me like the Joker in the Dark Knight. I mean, he just wants to see the world burn because he's hoping maybe the Vatican will be in charge once the ashes are done. I mean, that's the way the guy comes across to me.
Surprise, we're Lutherans. Yeah.
I mean, but I mean, it's not that. Look, I have a lot of sympathy for the points he's trying to make, but I don't agree. I don't agree with the points that he does make about, you know, how, you know, that some things trump nationalities or whatever, that your primary primary allegiances can be to things other than the church. I mean,
he says you can have other allegiances outside the church.
Well, maybe he does. I haven't read the whole thing, so I mean, I just started looking at it, and this was the impression I got.
Yeah.
And so, but I wonder if, you know, I just wonder though if the right approach isn't to say that for us truth is a person. And I do think Francis might do that. He might be inclined to say that.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's try and do it in a way that has some teeth.
Yeah, I haven't read that piece. I like that because in a way that the era where we live, the time that we inhabit right now, because we're in this weird place, like modernism is clearly dead, and everybody called this postmodern, right? Which I think we are, but I don't know what's next, right? And that's why I think, you know, technology, maybe that's the new age, you know, Terminator 2, man. Maybe the next whatever is going to be this age of technology, this age of artificial intelligence, this age, and that's why I all my cards on the table here. I am very, and I'm not going to say I'm a bit concerned with the ease that so many people just jump into technology, screens, and again, we talked about last time, but like, you know, I got 4 little kids, and I'm dead serious. None of my kids, so far as I can control and make this happen, will have their own smartphones before they're 18. You know, I think that, and that shouldn't be controversial.
I don't think it is. I mean, it's been observed that that's the policy of people that run these companies, and within their own families, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's not controversial. I think that I do think that, you know, and what's the name of the book that we're reading for in the pastors' conference?
I know that the author.
Redeeming Technology.
Yes.
Redeeming Technology. Great. It's been a great book. I recommend that too.
Shout out Trevor Sutton.
And your like 3 letters at the end, your alliterative end to the last chapter that we've been reading through together in the pastors' conference, right? You want to what were the 3 things that you wanted to, like, get rid of it?
Fast.
What's that?
Fast from it, like, so.
Yeah,
so you just get rid of it altogether. So the evil, vile stuff.
Okay, so get rid of it.
Destroy it. Fast
from it, and slow it down. Slow. And that's where I feel like the LCMS shines. We always say, hey, wait a minute, let's take it slow here. Yeah. When something new comes along, and so you hear me complain about how I feel like we're just always negative about everything, but at the same time, the instinct can lead to some healthy behavior. Yeah. And to just be a little bit skeptical. You say, wait a minute, everyone's running after this. Yeah. I'm going to wait.
to reflect on it, to make a decision as a community. Like we talked about that. Like there's a value to say, let's think about what the implications of this thing we embrace are, whatever that may be, right? Like whatever it may be. There's a million examples of this, right? But again, so the postmodern thing, I think maybe the next age, we call it information age, right? Which is kind of weird, but like I just feel like we're living in the tech age. And now we can't miss this. One of the premier, biggest, most powerful tech gurus in the world is like helping to call the shots in Washington D.C. And what what are the net results of that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a fascinating thing to just mention theologically, to think about it for a minute, because what I think gets missed in a lot of this is not that Elon Musk is kind of a smartass, and I mean, on a personal level, I'm not sure what I think of the guy, and I wish he were a Christian. He's not.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, at least I remember reading something of his, or where he said he isn't. And he said, "Oh, because I have to be so skeptical, like a scientist, I can't afford to like put my faith in anything." And that's just BS, I mean, and it's like there's no way I would ever get the guy's time, but I really would like to challenge him on that and say, "No, you're wrong about that." Maybe, maybe someone else with a higher profile and I can make him think about it.
Peter Thiel, you know who Peter Thiel is? So that
he's a Christian, isn't he?
He is. Yeah, he's a I think he's a confessing Christian. Goes to some evangelical church, I think.
Because I've read some stuff of his that's really good. Yeah.
No, yeah, and then he's influenced by by what's his name, the Roman Catholic thinker. We got the book here. I forget his name, about René Girard.
Okay.
You know René Girard at all?
No.
This whole idea of mimetic theory. I mean, this is a whole other wormhole, a whole bag of hammers here.
We should talk about it
we
sometime.
We
don't have time
we'll
today.
Bring it up on the next pod. Maybe we could do a podcast on René Girard. But yeah, and Peter Thiel was his student at Stanford. And Girard was the professor. But anyway, Peter Thiel's the guy who could influence, the Christian message to these guys.
Sure.
Because they're hanging out.
But what's making this work, what's making it possible, is actually AI and big data. That the federal government was intentionally designed to obfuscate, and they made their procedures so tangled that they can't even do their work. They can't like put numbers on there's a rule that says you have to have like a number on any time you write a check. You have to like have the justification. They leave it off about half the time almost, because they're not sure what justification to use. And they said, but we have to write this check because we're obligated to, so just leave it blank. And that's allowed them to cover up lots and lots of stuff. And now here comes these guys, these young Turks that are armed with this stuff, that are like at the peak of their intelligence in their early 20s, and they say, well, wait a minute, these algorithms we came up with, I mean, they can cut through all this and say, look, here's where the money's actually going. And that's what the daily scandals are coming out. It's like, wow, do you realize that all this money that's going into these things is actually just going to this guy? And to me, while I don't, I mean, you may disagree in the end. You say, well, yeah, that's a good thing. I don't care. And I'm leaving that aside. That's a political argument.
Sure.
But aren't we better off knowing? Are we better off knowing that the money is going there rather than leaving it obfuscated?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a movement in the church, right, years ago, obscurantism. Right? You never heard of obscurantism?
No.
It was in the late French Catholic Church before the French Revolution.
I think you mentioned this.
And the obscurantists taught that if you read the Bible and told the truth to the ordinary person, they would misunderstand it and it would just get them in trouble. Sure. And you're better off just keeping them in the dark and just telling them, hey, just listen to me. And I mean, and
modernism that's peak pinnacle modernism.
Right. But it's from the standpoint of the church. And
of course,
we've had to, because we really just have one book, right, which anyone can pick up and read.
Yeah.
And we don't have this, we can't hide things the way governments can. The way the church used to be able to. And so because of that, we've gotten used to the light of different opinions and stuff like that. I think we're equipped for this as a church body. I mean, we should stop being so skittish and start moving into it. I mean, that's
a good point,
part of the reason why I want to like do the podcast. It's like, you know what? yeah, I think we should be listened to.
Yeah. A voice. We're a voice in the wilderness, maybe.
Right.
One voice. The problem is there's lots of voices in the wilderness now with the advent of technology.
Yeah. Yeah. And
no more just Walter Cronkite every night. You got a million voices.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who do you listen to? That's the thing too. How do you like select and filter on who to listen to?
Maybe there's no universal answer to that. And I mean, but I think if you want to talk about the way the world's going to look in the future, I think that's more likely to be the case in some sort of dystopian, like Terminator 2 type thing. Yeah. I mean, there, and I'm not saying I'm not Pollyanna about it. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of spiritual dangers in that, all that ambiguity. But if we aren't willing, if we're just going to sit back and say, we can just teach the catechism and it'll be, fine. I had a church member years and years ago, and we said we weren't going to talk about members, but there's no way anyone's going to know what I'm talking about except maybe my wife. And he actually told me years ago, well, if you ever wind up watching, you know who you are. He said, if he's watching this podcast, well, he's still around and a friend. Yeah. But he told me once when I was complaining about how our church wasn't growing, he said, when all these people figure out what's coming on and they're really interested in the truth, they're going to come listen to us. I mean, and he said that with such ease, and it's like, oh, come on, that is not going to happen.
Osmosis.
They're just going to, and I worry about our current moment. That I think that some people might think, oh, it's finally happening, because we need to understand why it is that these young guys are coming in. We need to be listening to them and understand what is it about this that because and we need to grab onto it and say, because it's not going to stay here. That was another point I made in that sermon, was that all these seasons pass. You can sit there and say, oh, good, we're finally getting some traction, but it won't last long. And I mean, it'll move on. The parade is always marching,
always moving. What's the guy's name? Howard Zinn. You can't be neutral on a moving train. You ever heard this thing?
No, but that's cool.
Howard Zinn is this. He was like a radical kind of historian guy, like
I know who Howard Zinn is.
Out of Berkeley. He wrote a famous book called The People's History of the Republic, whatever.
Yeah, I'm not a fan, but that's okay.
Yeah. And that book's on here on the shelf. So actually, we'll give that to you before we leave that. But basically, he argued, he's telling you all the stuff they didn't teach in school, or whatever, which is interesting. But then he has this famous line. It's like the through line of the book is, like, whatever it is, and this I think applies in everything in life. You can't be neutral because you're living life. In other words, the train of life is moving. You have to make a decision. Am I going to get off the train? Am I going to stay on the train? Am I going to get off in this stop or that stop? And I think maybe that's a good segue transition to like just wrap this thing up a little bit of like, we pastors, we church people, whoever's listening to this, like if you're a church leader, we get them a couple hours a week. And then they go out into the world and they're on the train of the world and they're getting all those voices feeding into them. And so like, tend to your spiritual life, and as you mentioned last time, your spiritual disciplines, because it's tricky. The train keeps going. You can't pretend you're not moving.
Well, I am moving, just to kind of say, I'm personally moving in a direction where you talk about the pastor's content creator, to kind of bring back to the very first thing we talked about.
Yeah.
I want my congregation more than just when they're sitting in church.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool thing. We have the technology now. If I were willing to work hard enough, I mean, I could give them something to read every single day.
Sure.
And it's like, to help them interpret what they see, and say,
lectures and podcasts and books and articles.
Yeah. I mean, and it's hard. It's hard to say something short that's meaningful, right? I mean, we can carry on for an hour with no problem.
Clip it, dude. Yeah. You're right. So all that to say is, I mean, I think we're wrapping this thing up here a little bit here.
And now it's time for half-class reaction videos, where David and I take turns sharing things with each other, and you get to watch our first-time reactions.
Okay, you're watching a scene from this film, and again, strange premise. These are existential detectives that are following people around, helping them solve their problems. And this guy's, I forget the nature of this guy's problems specifically, but he's in the character played by Jude Law, and he's like a corporate kind of a guy. And they are in his office talking to him, and they're trying to like unfold something. Think of them as like therapists / detective kind of things. Anyway, And
Existential
Existential detectives. Yes, that's right.
All right.
So on your card, you could put that pastor/shepherd/existential detective.
Okay.
And so yeah, you're gonna watch the and
Okay.
The question there is first.
All right. Now is this the existential detective I'm looking at? Or this is the guy? He's the client
who's being followed and is not too friendly or big fans of these guys following them. It's a weird thing, but
okay.
They're in his office.
Well, because he certainly looks a little challenged there. Here, let's watch.
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers, but maybe he should listen to me more and learn a little.
You have several stories that you like to tell over and over and over and over.
Oh, that's not... Come on, that's a lie. I'm not boring like him.
Like the mayonnaise story, the mayo story.
May 18th, sales meeting.
Shania's there, promoting her apparel, right? It's 4 o'clock. She's starving. She hates mayonnaise, right? Allergic to it. So I ordered a ton of tuna fish sandwiches. Back then, that's all she's eating. Tuna fish. No mayo, darling.
June 5th, driving range.
No joke. We gave her a chicken salad sandwich once. She threw up in the back of the limo.
June 30th, the lake.
This is so uncomfortable for me because that's what I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't. I'm always.
Let me set it up better. I forgot to tell you. So this is a scene where he's gonna. They're making him vulnerable by showing him. He always tries to be cool by referencing this story of this one famous person that he knows, and then they're gonna undo him.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. All right. So but I can relate though. Just you can sort of see the guy in a way he's still enjoying it after all this time. So, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Shania's there, promoting her apparel, right? It's 4 o'clock, and she's starving. She's a busy lady. So I ordered a ton of tuna fish sandwiches. That's all she's eating back then, tuna fish.
July 9th, flight 27 to Chicago.
Shania's there promoting her apparel, right? It's 4 o'clock, she's starving. The lady...
Wait a minute. Are these guys like supernatural or something that they knew all this stuff?
They record. It's exactly right. There's a bit of a plot hole. They recorded. They've been following him, right? And so they got these recordings of his life for the past.
I see. So
yes.
So they're not like okay.
They record. They tapped his phones, and when you watch the movie, they give him access supposedly. But they've tapped his phones, been bugging everywhere he's at, and they're noticing this story that he loves to tell about Shania Twain, and it's going to prove him to be.
And he hates chicken salad. Gave it to her once, she threw up.
August 17th, conference call.
Shania's there promoting her apparel, right? No mayo. She hates it, and she cannot eat chicken salad. That's no joke.
September 3rd, in traffic, your cell phone.
Shania's there promoting her apparel, right? Back then, that's all she's eating, tuna fish. No mayo. I ate 2 of the sandwiches in front of her. She now eats 1.5. Now she believes me. She eats 1.5 sandwiches before she realizes it's chicken salad.
You guys record this without cracking up. This must have been like 15 takes. I mean,
this movie is comedy drama.
Lily Tomlin. I mean, that's just that look. I mean, it's just, yeah.
And what's the name? What's the other?
Why do you think that you tell the Mayo story so much?
I don't know why.
It's propaganda.
For mayonnaise.
For you.
Specifically, you're so impressive because you know Shania, and you're so strong because you pull one on her.
You're a funny guy, a good guy.
Keeping everyone laughing so that maybe, quote, you don't get depressed.
So what's so great about depression?
Nothing. Unless it holds the key to something you compulsively avoid, so it'll never be examined or felt, hence your behavior becomes repetitive, like the story.
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 Shut up.
Why can't I preach like that? I mean, you can see they got him, right? I mean, they got him. Yeah, wow.
They put him down.
All right. I don't have to tell stories.
What do you think would happen if you didn't tell the stories? Are you being yourself?
How am I not myself?
How am I not myself?
Myself.
How am I not myself?
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 How am I not myself? How am I not myself?
How am I not myself?
Sure. I always think of Rain Man.
How am I not myself?
How am I not myself? How am I not myself? How am I not myself? How am I not myself? How am I not myself? How am I not
Like echoing in his head.
Bradley?
She's starving. She's a busy lady. So I ordered a ton of tuna fish sandwiches. That's all she's eating back then, tuna fish.
Oh my gosh.
What's funny is, just
Oh
real
my
quick, while
gosh.
you reflect, if you talk about existentialism and like and Karl Barth and stuff, this is like an existential film kind of. An existential instead is a philosophy now, basically. But yeah, how am I not myself, man?
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. But just the thunderclap. Yeah. Oh man, that is something else. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. I ought to, if they had more scenes like that, I definitely want to watch that. Oh, and Dustin Hoffman's so good.
Good actors too.
And Lily Tomlin. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Half Glass Podcast. Please like and subscribe to get more of our content.